Amidst the scorched sands of modern Iran lie the remnants of one of history's greatest civilizations, the Persian Empire. Renowned for its achievements in architecture, cultural tolerance, technology, and governance, it shaped the foundations of this part of the world. Yet, like all great empires, it had a darker side often overshadowed by its glory. Legends and classical accounts tell of spine-chilling punishments inflicted on those who defied the Persians, punishments so brutal they leave modern historians in shock and disbelief. Join us in this video as we embark on a journey back in time to explore Persian Empire's most terrifying and disgusting punishments. History in the area we now know as Iran extends back many thousands of years, with evidence suggesting humans roamed the rugged hills surrounding the Kale Kurd cave close to 500,000 years ago. Fast forward to the second millennium BC, we begin to see nomadic groups from the Caucasus region migrating onto the plateau of Iran, a fertile region slightly east of Mesopotamia. These groups were easily identified by their unique Indo-Iranian tongue, a language that branched off from Proto-Indo-European. This migration would have everlasting effects on this part of the world, eventually leading to the creation of the largest empire ever witnessed at this point in history less than 1,000 years later. Over time, these nomadic peoples morphed into two groups, the Medes in the north and the Persians in the south. In the centuries that followed, the Persians were subject to the overwhelming power of the Medes. This remained so until the rise of Cyrus II around 550 BC. This pivotal figure, later known as Cyrus the Great, unified the Persian tribes and rebelled against their Median overlords. In time, this enigmatic figure conquered vast swaths of land, bringing the Median territories under his rule, and he established the largest empire the world had ever seen at this point in history. Cyrus began as the first Persian ruler and the first king of the Achaemenids dynasty. Cyrus was a generous and benevolent ruler who respected all races and encouraged religious and cultural freedom. Due to the Persians' tolerance and ingenuity, the empire grew rapidly. At its greatest height, it stretched from Greece in the west to India in the east, and is famous for its architectural wonders, including the Persepolis and the Royal Road. The Persians adopted technology from other civilizations and invented new things themselves, and their expertise in administration resulted in a government that could function as a whole, despite the fact individual territories were separated by thousands of miles. The opportunities were abundant for those who desired to reap the rewards of being part of such an extensive empire. However, those who broke the law or sought to deceive Persian civilians would be subject to some of the ancient world's most spine-chilling and downright appalling punishments. Here are 5 of the worst. Number 1. Being crushed by an elephant. The Persian Empire was abundant in elephants, sourcing these majestic animals from the southern provinces of Iran, India, and quite possibly Mesopotamia. The military utilized them throughout the Achaemenid, then later in the Seleucid and the Sasanian periods. The ancient Iranians considered elephants a symbol of power. While they could be used to intimidate enemies on the battlefield, they could also be used to terrify prisoners and, in some cases, end their lives. During the height of the Persian Empire, various executions were carried out by using these enormous animals to physically crush the convicted. The condemned individual would be laid out on their back on the ground. From there, the executioners would then instruct a well-trained elephant to trample the unfortunate soul to death in a scenario that would have been both highly unsettling and undoubtedly gruesome. Elephants are some of the largest animals in the ancient world, and the force they could generate by stamping downward is truly unimaginable. Bones would be immediately crushed, organs destroyed, and blood would spew outwards from the convicted as they lay helpless on the floor. In some distorted way of looking at such an execution, death would likely come very quickly despite being excruciatingly painful. However, for some, the process was drawn out. In such a scenario, the elephant would slowly crush individual parts of an individual's body, often beginning with the arms or legs. This aimed to prolong the suffering, likely in response to a serious crime, but it also served as a brutal reminder to those watching what fate may await them should they commit a grave offense against the empire, such as treason. Number 2. Scaphism. We must issue a brief warning that this next punishment is not for the faint of heart or the squeamish. According to the Greek philosopher Plutarch in his work Life of Artaxerxes, the people of Persia used a method known as scaphism, which, according to some historians, is one of the absolutely worst ways to die. The punishment involved placing a prisoner within 2 boats, which had been placed atop one another and nailed together to make a distinctive coffin-like structure. However, the head, arms, and legs of the condemned would stick out through holes cut into the boat and would be left to bake in the scorching sun. After some time, guards would force-feed the convicted felons a copious amount of milk and honey, the latter of which was also drizzled over their faces in hopes of attracting an assortment of pests and bugs. In time, the individuals would begin to urinate and fill the innards of the boat with excrement. Eventually, they would find themselves in a puddle of their own feces. This would attract insects and all kinds of vermin, which would begin to eat the individuals alive. Some pests would even enter into the person's bowels and eat them alive from within in a truly harrowing fashion. The body would enter into a state of decomposition due to the emergence of maggots before death even arrived, further adding to the horrific misery of this punishment. Attempting to grasp just how horrendous this practice was is extremely difficult, nor can we even imagine how agonizing the entire process would be. This entire punishment could last for over 2 weeks, and by the end, the stench could be smelt from a considerable distance away. Generally, no individual survived such an ordeal, making it one of the most gruesome ways to die. Number 3. The Tower of Silence. Ancient Persia had a unique and distinct religious practice known as Zoroastrianism, named after their prophet Zoroaster and Zarathustra in their native tongue. In ancient times, this religious group conducted a unique burial ceremony in which they would expose the deceased's remains atop a circular structure referred to as the Tower of Silence. However, this sacred and ritualistic practice was sometimes repurposed as a horrendous form of punishment for living souls. This practice involved leaving prisoners to die alone atop the isolated towers, far from the eyes of society. They were tied to the top of the towers, exposed to the elements and opportunistic vultures who saw the immobilized felons as a form of sustenance. As the convicts were bound tightly with rope, they were unable to defend themselves as the hungry birds began plucking away at their flesh, tearing skin and muscle from the bone in a painful fashion. While the punishment was undoubtedly harrowing, it was seen as humiliating to those sentenced to such a fate. However, worst of all, religious implications came with such a practice. In Zoroastrianism, a proper burial was integral to one's journey to the afterlife. Being exposed in such a manner was considered the harshest of all punishments. So, while the original custom of laying the deceased out atop a Tower of Silence was in line with the burial customs of Zoroastrianism, the idea of conducting such a practice on a living human was intended to deny the individual the sacred rituals required for a pleasant afterlife. Despite the horrifying nature of this punishment, the only classical writer to mention it was Herodotus. As he provided little or no source of this information, various scholars have disputed the Greek historian's claims. Number 4. Ashes to ashes. In ancient times, the Persians used the charred remains of fire to punish and execute those convicted of serious crimes. While there are several ways in which they utilized ash to execute criminals, one of the more infamous methods saw a convict taken to a small room. Inside, they would be bound up and forced to stand in the center of the room, which had been filled with several feet of ash. Eventually, the individual would fall to the floor with exhaustion. Over the course of the next few days, the victim would slowly breathe in ash particles, leading to suffocation. As ash began to violently fill one's lungs with each gasping breath, death loomed ever closer. Generally, the victim was denied any food or water and eventually passed away from suffocation. Many ancient historians describe this as a gruesome and time-consuming death and a period of extended suffering. Number 5. The underground dungeons. During the Sasanian period, the last of the ancient Persian dynasties, numerous political prisons appeared throughout the vast territory. The most infamous of all was the Castle of Oblivion, located in Khuzestan, southwestern Iran. According to the Buzandaran Patmutnik and the Procopius's Persian War, the name referred to the fact that it was forbidden to mention the name of the castle or its prisoners. While little is recorded about the nature of life in such a prison, we can surmise it would have been a horrid experience for those convicted of treason and other political crimes. Unlike modern minimal security prisons, the cells within this castle are specifically designed to break an individual's spirit and leave them devoid of hope. The cells would have remained in a near constant state of darkness. Stagnant, moldy air encompassed the castle, and the howling moans of individuals who feared they might never see the light of day again rung outwards like a bell. Dread and anxiety would have fueled the minds of the prisoners who sat alone on the cold ground of the cell. Would they see their family or enjoy a hot meal ever again? Rodents and insects polluted the prison, and infection ran rampant on the sick. A lack of sustenance and water often drove many to insanity, and most were left to die in these cells. One can only imagine the hopelessness many faced in such an environment. It was a way to break and bend the will of even the strongest Persians. The lucky few who survived would return to the outside world a shell of their former self, fragile and mentally broken. To the Persians, who deeply valued strength and honor, such a horrendous punishment was devised to strip them of their humanity and ensure the administrative and political class remained in line. The punishments laid out in this video showcase a dark side to the Persian Empire and clearly indicate they sought to inflict the maximum amount of suffering upon their prisoners in unique ways. But when we consider the various cultures of this era, we can easily come to the conclusion that the Persians were not the only ones to punish prisoners in such a dramatic fashion. Throughout the Bible, we observe stories where entire cities were slaughtered by Semitic-speaking cultures such as the Babylons, Assyrians, and even the Hebrew peoples. We need only look to the New Testament to see signs of a massacre, wherein King Herod ordered the killing of all male Jewish infants under the age of 2. In hindsight, the ancient world was a brutal one. The Romans, often considered the most civilized of ancient peoples, even partook in elaborate punishments, including crucifixion and condemning prisoners to be torn apart by wild animals before a cheering audience. The so-called barbarous punishments conducted by the Persian Empire are not as far removed from modern man as most would like to think.